All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. There are some other folks who may be joining us. I will keep my eye on the waiting room and let them in as they join. In the meantime, though, I want to get this conversation started because it's a really great one, and I don't want to take up any more time waiting. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Abby Straczynski Rojas, and I manage the Student and Young Alumni Programming for the UWM Alumni Association. This afternoon, we have a really exciting conversation about how the COVID-19 pandemic and just kind of everything that we've gone through over the last almost year has changed job seeking, hiring, and just the overall world of work. Today, we are joined by three dynamic and experienced professionals who are also proud UWM Panthers, who will discuss how the pandemic has altered their work and just overall, job hunting and job seeking in general, and what challenges the pandemic has kind of presented, and how current students and recent grads and young alumni can rise to those challenges. So I will keep your microphones muted. If you'd like to turn on your camera, feel free. Otherwise, you can keep those off. I am recording this presentation and you will get it in a follow-up email tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. You are welcome to share it with friends, colleagues, classmates, anyone you think who might find the conversation helpful. If you have questions throughout our conversation, please add those to the chat box. We're going to have a nice chunk of time at the end of our conversation to take questions from our audience. So at this time, I'd like you to give a warm Panther welcome to Martha Kerrigan, the founder and CEO of Big Shoes Network, Annalie Okonkwo, the talent acquisition business partner for Group M, and Morgan Potter, learning and talent development strategist for Publicis Sapient. So I am going to, one thing you might want to do is pin our three speakers as well as myself, the moderator. That way you'll see our video throughout the conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Martha to start. If each of you could just introduce yourselves, your connection to UWM, and then just a little bit about the work that you currently do, and then we'll dive into our panel questions. So Martha, I'll start with you.
Sounds good. Obviously, I'm a grad. I am also a mentor to a lot of students on a couple of advisory boards at UWM. UW-Milwaukee is also a client. My company that I own is a small business. It's a niche job board and resource site called Big Shoes Network. The name comes from if you've got big shoes to fill. And we serve about 4,000 agencies, corporations, nonprofits, and recruiters in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. And my job there is CEO, marketing strategist, and finance.
Excellent. Annalie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Annalie. I'm a recruiter at Group M. I am a 2012 graduate of a Panther graduate. I went to school for HR and actually ran track there as well for 4 years. It was a great time. And I currently recruit for all entry level and internships across the country. So LA, New York, Chicago, anywhere. So yeah.
Excellent. And what about you, Morgan?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan Potter. I graduated in 2011. I played volleyball there. So Annalie, we probably passed each other quite a bit in the Kalachi Center. I graduated with a degree in HR as well. And I currently work for an advertising agency based out of Chicago in our learning and development. So I partner with our HR business partners, recruiting, and then leadership to put together some learning strategy and growth plans for our people.
Excellent. So the first big question, kind of overarching question, is how has your work changed over the last, we're coming up on 11 months that we've been in this kind of quarantine pandemic situation. So in what ways has your work changed? And I will I'll pass it off to Annalie, and then you can pass the
Yeah,
ball.
so my work changed a lot. So literally we had one day we're working remotely for like a test day, and then we didn't go back to the office. I was like, okay. So since last March, I've been at home working with none of my teammates, no one around me. It's kind of me working, doing everything virtually. And we had a really big hiring freeze earlier on because of the pandemic. So that was a really big thing too with this recruiting and us being kind of in the limbo because we didn't know if we had a job still. So that was a really big 5-month thing, but it's changed a lot now. I'm hiring a lot now, just kind of seeing how we can get people in the door who want to, be able to work remotely fully, and being entry level, it's really hard to do that. So kind of someone who is a good go-getter, someone who wants to grow in the role too. So it's kind of what I've been seeing so far as a recruiter.
Excellent. Martha or Morgan, any insight into how the pandemic has changed your work?
I work out of my home, so our office is out of our home, and we outsource a lot of the ancillary services. So on the one hand, it hasn't. I've been quarantined for 14 years, sort of, but I don't spend a lot of time in my office. So I had been out on the road quite a bit, so that completely shut down. And the initial work change went from very marketing strategy oriented to focusing on finance and funding to keep the business alive, but then also to continue to have the freedom to do the things that we do, which is helping other people out. So that was the immediate result. The secondary result is we are kind of at the forefront as a company of what is happening in the economy. So Annalie, when you mentioned the layoffs, we've had clients who've had 2 and 3 versions of layoffs at different levels. And we're also at the forefront when things come back. And so we thought things would be really dead when it came to hiring and people paying us to post their job postings. But that actually has changed in the last month. It has really taken off, and all of the economic projections that we look at have said that things are quite a bit turning a corner in particular industries. So
it's crazy. It's crazy right now for hiring. So I totally understand.
What about you, Morgan?
So we are a consulting service. So we were definitely impacted in that initial, like everything shut down, everything froze. And so we had a lot of bigger companies, pulling back on spending. And so we were impacted, as well as I think every industry pretty much was. Yeah. And so, I think what's great about the way that my company handled it is we're still able to deliver work. Our main strategy is about digital business transformation. And so we weren't ever at risk of not being able to deliver work to clients, which is great. So we were really set up for success in that way versus some of these older companies that, didn't have online, didn't have VPN, didn't have any type of abilities to go remote. And so they were having to learn. That learning curve had to have been so overwhelming and steep for them. And so for me, I'm just now remote, and I don't go into our office in Chicago, and it's been almost a year, which is insane to think about. But yeah, I think for me, it's a lot of the video calls. It's the trying to be very, very mindful in the way that I connect with people, because it is really mentally draining to be on video calls for 8 hours a day. So the time that you do have with people, making it really high value is, the focus of what we're trying to do now. That's a little bit differently than in the beginning where everybody had Zoom fatigue. That was a very real thing.
It is. And it really sounds like the changes you've all been through in the last 11 months are similar to the changes that the students on this call have been through as well. So I think we can all relate to that. As we continue in this virtual world, until when we're not entirely sure, but even after, kind of we come out of this pandemic, there's going to be most likely a virtual element to the work that we do moving forward. What skills have you found most necessary to get hired in this virtual world? And then what skills are employers looking for that they might not have been looking for a year ago from their virtual workforce? And how can students begin to hone those skills? Annalie, you want to start?
Yeah, so as I'm the recruiter right now, so on my end, I think communication's a big one. Just like with me, if you're going to talk to me virtually, have a really good voice on the phone, be able to talk more about like my background, more about the company as well, have that really good baseline knowledge is really great. As well as the person who is in this role can be like really accountable to as well. But coming forward, getting a job with us, it's more or less, again, communication. Like we have teams where it's like, yeah, we had somebody who didn't like respond to us for weeks. I'm like, what? Like a team. So just like you need to be able to communicate virtually, as well as being able to just be accountable with your actions, because you'll make mistakes coming into a new job, even virtually. It's hard to onboard too. And it's kind of hard not to be personal with somebody. So you have to be really like on your toes and be accountable if you make mistakes, as well as be able to kind of grow yourself with every moment you can.
Excellent. Martha or Morgan, anything to add?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways or lessons learned for some of our more junior folks is the ability to be really, really agile and, being able to say yes to just about anything, because what we see a lot of times with folks is that they have this perfect situation in their head of what they want to go do, this type of work that they want this very specific experience. And in the business world, things change all the time and it's constant, and you have to be able to kind of roll with the punches and take maybe certain roles or assignments that might not be perfect for you, but it will give you an experience. And you have to change that outlook to like, I want to be doing this and I want to be making this much money and I want to be A, B, C, and D, versus like, okay, this might not be the exact fit, but it is going to give me an experience that I wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. And so that, to me, just being able to kind of roll with it and say yes to a bunch of things that might not be comfortable or might not fit what the mold that you're trying to fit into yourself. That's my thing for anyone. And
I want to add to your point too, Morgan. I want to add to your point too. I've seen that just like as an entry-level person, you have to prove yourself to your team. You don't just go in there like, oh, I'm the best. No, you're not. You don't know anything about the job that you're doing at hand. So you have to really be able to prove yourself to your team every single day. Like Morgan said, like do more, raise your hand to do more. And teams love that because they're showing you can do more for the team and want to help out more. But if you're not somebody who can do that, it's going to be really tough for you too, because it is what you make it up to. If you're someone who's like, hey, I know I'm new to this team, I'm gonna be able to talk to everybody via virtually or via coffee chat. You can make those things happen for yourself, but if you kind of sit back and don't do anything, you're gonna have a really hard time adjusting to this too as well. So have that in mind as well.
I would add to always be learning. Like the learning is on you now. I know everybody wants professional development, but it really is on the individual. And what I mean by that is being really curious either about your field or other areas. So being very well read, online books, however that is, to look at what trends are happening. And then you have that thought leadership and that knowledge or that curiosity. I'm going to piggyback on what Morgan said. Take the initiative to volunteer for those projects so you can be learning. So it all that bottom line. And because the world is so virtual, it used to be that when you were on the shop floor or in the office, that you would naturally have what we would call FaceTime, where you get to see people and you would hear these conversations, so you could jump in and say, hey, I just learned about that, or hey, I want to do that project, or I don't feel like I'm growing. What should I do next? And asking questions. Well, we don't have that now. And so the important thing is to initiate your own FaceTime, to be present in those meetings and not just sit there and listen, but if you have a question, to venture out and ask that question, because probably somebody else does too, or to initiate and say, I just read about that and would love to investigate that further on behalf of our company. And so it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. It just means that you have to always be learning, to be agile, and to jump in on things that will advance you, even if it's not necessarily your area. So kind of wrapping that in.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And that kind of leads to my next question, which kind of bridging off of the point you just made, Martha, is how do job seekers, as well as young professionals who are maybe in their first job, how do they stand out, both positively and negatively? So can you give a couple of examples of ways that either an applicant or an interviewee or a young professional in the role stands out both positively and negatively. Martha, do you want to continue since you kind of just started that theme?
Yeah, you can stand out or you can stick out.
Right.
So if you want to stand out, I have an acronym in my head that I use when I talk with a variety of groups, and that is ALAS. Ask questions and informed questions. If I'm in an interview, if I'm interviewing someone and they say, well, what is Big Shoes all about? Ding, you just stuck out instead of standing out. I want you to do that research up front, but to also ask questions that show you're curious about the opportunity before you, whether you're an employee or interviewing for a position. Then listen to the answer. Oftentimes I will answer something and that person will then turn around and ask a question. That was just what I answered. So listen to what I answered, apply what you heard. So maybe after the interview's over, send a note that says, hey, you recommended I look at this resource and I did and found this clue out. Or if you ask a question like, what's an account you'd really love to land of your interviewer, turning around and delivering a packet that says, here's some intel that I have on that company. And then finally, to share that information. So what I mentioned was just sharing it with maybe the hiring influence, but also sharing it with other people in your circle. Because when you help other people out, you learn better about that ask, listen, apply. And then also you're getting some good street cred out there with other people. And in our region, it is a small region. So that will generate some real energy, both in your job search and taking you to the next level in a job. Ask, listen, apply, and share.
Excellent. Ali or Morgan, do you have any examples of how people stand out positively or stick out negatively when it comes to the job seeking process, as well as, you know, once they've landed that initial role?
I can go. Yeah, I think standing out is hard to do, especially as someone who's more junior in your career, because the pool is so saturated. There are so many folks that are looking for jobs, and so you really want to be creative in, you know, the way that you're applying, in how it's not like a copy and paste. Make sure that, you know, you're double checking everything that you're putting into an application, because the worst thing is if you're looking at, you know, some applications and you see like the wrong company name, it's just like, okay, I know you're just going copy and paste through the whole thing. So just being really mindful, and it is a process. And, you know, I have empathized with new job seekers, because I can remember trying to find an internship, and you're talking, you know, to 50 different companies at once, and it's very overwhelming, and trying to stay organized and on top of it. So just be mindful, be creative, be yourself, because what you don't want to do is be one way and then you come in and you're, you know, you talk this talk, you were this thing, and then the next time they see you, they hire you, and you're like, well, this isn't a fit, because you have completely changed. So just be yourself. It will be a process for you to find a place that really feels comfortable for you. And it's okay to take on, you know, not every company you work for will be a company you love, unfortunately. That's just how the way that the world works. But I think just be really, really open and honest. So don't lie. We can tell when you're lying. If, you know, we can tell when you're kind of making things up. It's okay to say, I don't have a specific experience for X, Y, Z, but I do have this similar experience. I think, especially being an athlete, I didn't have time to work a lot of jobs in college. And so I was able to translate a lot of other experiences that weren't necessarily business or HR related into those scenarios. I think, to me, just being able to look at any experience in your life and turn them into an example in a job interview, to me, well, you'll stand out beyond, versus trying to make something up on the fly, because we can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that too, I think for like candidates, it's kind of like you get nervous in an interview. Sorry about the noise. Either with me or with the hiring teams, but like we totally get it. So it's all about your confidence too. If you're like excited about the role and you show that passion, I love that. And so do the hiring teams. They want somebody who coming in as new blood to be excited and passionate about the work they're doing. If you don't have that, they're kind of like, they want the job, do they want it? And also too, send thank you notes, going up to Martha's point before, those are really, really important. Yesterday I made a hire and they're like, yeah, she's the only person that sent us a thank you note. I'm like, that can be like literally a make it or break it. If you don't send thank you notes, someone might and make a job over you because they get that extra push and extra effort to the hiring team to like, be like, hey, thank you for your time. Thank you for this point, you know, kind of like bringing that full forward. So just like be able to do that too as well once you get interviews.
So follow-up question to that, in a virtual world. So Morgan, you talked about creativity. Annalie, you talked about, you know, authentic, like being authentic. Are there a couple of like nuggets of advice where you can really make that stand out? Or Martha, your ALAS acronym in the virtual world. So if I was going into an interview, how do I, because I feel like in a virtual world, it's a little bit easier to be inauthentic because we're hidden behind a screen. You know, you don't walk in with that really strong handshake and present your resume and, you know, wearing the suit or whatever. It's different now. So are there any nuggets of wisdom that you found in reviewing, you know, creative correspondences virtually, which typically would happen anyways, but then that virtual interview, the virtual follow-up interview, that those sort of things that students might be facing in the next year while we're still really in this virtual position?
Yeah,
I
can start and then I'll let the two who do more hiring elaborate examples. I think for me, my biggest piece of advice is get comfortable being in front of a camera. We just did this with a learning program in my work. It's just simulations. Have someone you're comfortable with give you some feedback, especially if it is you're doing a lot of interviews and it's important to think about your camera positioning and lighting and all of these things. So just practice and get comfortable in front of a camera, because whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. So as time goes on, you'll want to just make sure that you're comfortable with it. That I think is the biggest. We have people that are very senior in my organization that still struggle after a year of doing this. And so the more that you can get comfortable being in front of a camera, it'll just be better for you in the long run.
I would add to that, again, it goes back to the research. If you're going to be interviewing on camera, then find out what is the culture of the organization with which you're interviewing. Because even if the person you're interviewing with is interviewing you from their home, they are actually interviewing you for their company. So I can think of 3 examples recently where I interviewed someone, and in one case, it was like the Blair Witch Project. It was really dark, and the person had a hoodie, and it was like gathered around their face, and they were talking right up in front of the camera like this. And I was a little uncomfortable with that because they were, you know, interviewing for a sort of an academic position. Another person showed up like this, and it literally was like he just rolled out of bed, and his hair was all messed up, and this was really for an impressive kind of position. And I was a little shocked, and it ended up, it rolled out fine, but clearly I still have that first impression of the person. And then I had someone else who was running late because of some car trouble, and he was so apologetic, but then he switched gears and dove right into you could tell he prepared. And so technology is going to screw up. You know, you're going to come in with mishaps and stuff, but what do you do with that? That makes an almost better impression. It says, oh, this person can pivot if something like that happens during a client brief or something, you know what I mean? So 3 examples, all memorable in my head.
And I would just say too, to like research too is really big, but also like look at your interviewers' LinkedIn's. I can tell you how many people actually like did that for me, and were like, oh, you ran track here. I'm just like, how'd you know that? But I'm just like, oh, you actually looked at my LinkedIn if you wanted to get to know me better. So that's really a big thing. And for me, I'm working at an agency, like media agencies, and it's very like a small world. So say you have a person who's been at different agencies, you can ask them questions about their time at different agencies and get them to talk more about themselves, and you can get to know them better as well. But again, ask your recruiter. So like if I'm your recruiter, ask me about the culture. Be like, hey, what's the culture like? How are the offices? I know they're closed now, but like, how is it? How's it working from home? Like asking the questions about that so you can like learn more about the culture in the first call and ask questions from there too as well.
Excellent. And another nice thing about the virtual world is I think it makes informational interviews a little bit more accessible and easy. So message someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes to sit down with me and talk about your company? I know you're not hiring right now, but I'd just love to know more about what you do. And that gets you comfortable behind a camera or in front of a camera, and maybe learn more about the culture before you're in a formal interview setting. And that's a nice thing about this virtual world is we don't have to travel to have those conversations or, get on the phone. We can do it face to face over video chat, which I think is a positive. So,
Can I add a couple of things too?
of course.
Be prepared for a team interview where there are multiple, you've got tiles on your virtual interview so that you're ready to respond to people, even if their faces don't appear. So be ready for that. And to ask questions that show that you've done research. And then finally, do know that it is a hypocritical world still. So if I say to you, show up on screen dressed just a smidge better than what the culture of the company maybe calls for, something that makes you feel more professional, that's great. But if your interviewers show up in sweats, that doesn't mean you can kind of let down, because we do have some interviewers out there that say, I'm already hired, but you're not. So bring it up a notch, babe, buddy, come on. So just know that happens, and it's okay once you're in, but just for now, take it up a notch. And LinkedIn has some great practice video interviewing things that you can do too. So
Excellent. What are, and we've touched on this a little bit, but can any of you point to specific challenges that you see applicants or new hires facing and how they've overcome those? You've all touched on it a little bit, the research and paying attention and raising your hand and that sort of thing. But are there any specific challenges that you've witnessed in the last few months, and how someone might have overcome those, that young people can be prepared?
Can you rephrase that question?
Sure. So if you have applicants coming in, or interviewees or new hires that you are working with, have you witnessed any specific challenges in this new world, and how they've overcome those?
I'm going to dive in on that, because my job is to do a lot of research about what's happening in the working world as a whole, particularly during COVID, but even before. And two of the challenges that I see is the constant change. Morgan alluded to that, having to really be learning new stuff, and things are constantly changing, and they're going to change faster.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that, what happens with that is then there's burnout. So we're seeing a lot of employment reports about how to engage your employees, with the understanding that there's a lot of burnout happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at, yes, it's positive change. People are going to be hiring more. But even that is like, oh my gosh, just one more big change we're not done yet with all of that, right? So that's going to be the constant. And then, so self-care when it comes to addressing the change, not taking it personally. We are hearing about a lot of hiring that's going on, and yet you may be applying to a lot of opportunities and still not making that land, getting that deal. Don't take it personally. Just keep reaching out and keep connecting with people.
What I would say is that we've adjusted a lot within the industry. I think that media, Morgan probably told you too as well, we've done a really great job of how we adjusted to this new time, and how, for example, I had a team who I talked to who the manager has been within the role for maybe 3 years. She's really known. She's like, yeah, I've onboarded everyone remotely from my time I've been here. So all I know is that. So that's really changing. But just having that want, again, from before, to like really do more. Because you're a brand new employee, you have to actually be on your tip top toes all day, every day, until you can prove yourself to the team. Because if you want to grow into roles within like media or anything like that, you have to really prove yourself every single day, day in and day out. So I think that being on time, hitting your deadlines, asking for help, reaching out for questions, like being that person who's very communicative and kind of acting like you're in the office, but you're not in the office. Having that mindset of it is really, really important to see, your team can see you doing well and growing into the role.
Can I ask a question that's kind of piggybacks on that of you guys? Would you say that applicants' expectations of salary are aligning well with what your employers are paying? Or is it because I am hearing from applicants, well, this is what I'm asking, but they're not going to pay that much. Should I push or should I not? So that, I say, is a challenge. And how do you guys answer it?
I just tell people this is like our baseline salary, and it's no negotiation for associates because they're all entry level. I think that what they don't know is that you have to, like, again, prove yourself. Like, you can't make, $70K a year not knowing anything about the industry. You have to actually learn from it. And as you do that, you can grow. So I kind of push from them like, hey, the growth is really great and you can really, grow rapidly within the industry. But usually salary, they know baseline beforehand at my first interview. And if they want to go ahead and interview, great. If they don't, there's people who want the salary, who want to get in this industry. So it's very competitive in that way too. So if you don't want the job, someone else wants a job too as well.
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect between college grads in the last like few years and what's really realistic in an entry level job. So I'm sure that I'm not surprised that there's a disconnect between what the expectations are and what's actually realistic. When I was doing a lot of campus recruiting, we're very upfront about it. So if it's something, if you do market research and you have something to back it up, that's one thing. But if you're just asking for a certain dollar amount because that's what your friend makes at a different company, something that, like, it's just not realistic. But I think, going back to the challenge in these times that, everybody is kind of going through, I loved the point that you were making, Annalie, about, and, we all kind of said it at one point, raising your hand for other things. But I think right now, because there aren't office cultures that people are experiencing, it's getting involved in that. It's a plus one to your job. But to me, it serves you tenfold versus just be doing your, one specific role, because you're networking, you're meeting new people, you're showing that you're engaged. It has a lot more to say about you than it does probably the level of effort it's going to require. So I think, to me, just ask about that, especially in an interview, at what culture initiatives can I get involved in?
Right.
That is going to speak, I think, volumes to your engagement in the company. Because it's right now, every company's culture is struggling.
Yeah.
It's really hard to engage people in +1 activities during this time. We're all feeling it, right? Like the number of happy hours we probably went to in the very beginning of COVID of, it's like 4 times a week. And I'm like, well, I just physically can't consume that much without feeling, especially in the industry that we're in, right? So I think there was a fatigue there, but finding really creative ways of getting engaged in the culture is such a good breath of fresh air and a nice break from the monotony of, I'm pulling this Excel report or I'm answering these emails or getting on another Zoom call. It's a nice way to break up your time too.
And in some cases, it's the only way that you'll meet people
Totally.
in your office, because you may have an onboarding manager or a mentor or something, and you may not meet anyone else on your team unless you have to, unless you're engaging in some kind of culture building, and that's allowing you to reach out to other people and connect with other people on the team, which will be very helpful as you grow in your role.
Yeah. And I think for, my organization, especially in a lot of these consulting firms or larger firms where you have global teams and you could go working on the same team for years and never meet anybody in person, it's important to feel at home in that organization. So really getting engaged in local chapters or local culture, or whatever it might be, is going to be important as the world continues to become even more global and businesses become more global. I've got counterparts in every country in the world and I'll never meet them, but I can still feel engaged in our local organization, even though we're not going back anytime soon.
Yeah, and for example, for me, my whole team is in New York, so I'm the only LA person on my team, and like I haven't met them before, but like I feel like I know them because I'm like with them all the time, like via Teams or like chatting with them, kind of get to know them better. Like, oh, how was your weekend? People really do that, they really want to make sure you're good to go. Within like agencies, I have really good like mental health resources because COVID's been hard on so many people, and we all know that. Like for me, I'm for myself. Quarantine with myself, so kind of just like I know that I need people to be around me in some way. So it's really good to have like teams who support you, and most of the teams now are aware of that too. And also with diversity and inclusion is a really big thing too for all of our companies. And since things are happening in this world that are very, very like important, like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, we are really making those changes with our companies to be more diverse and inclusive, as well as be more open conversation. So companies are making changes, but make sure the company is actually doing it, but not just saying it to you, because it's kind of hard to like differentiate that, but like ask questions about that in more detail if that's what you want to get into more and have that kind of homey feeling for you.
Excellent. So I have one final question, but it's about a job seeker toolbox. And I'm not going to ask that right now because in the follow-up email that I'm going to send tomorrow, Martha has actually put together a really fantastic kind of job seeker toolbox that sort of lays out recommendations. So we'll cover that in a minute. But what I want to do right now is actually open up. We have a smaller group than I was anticipating. So if anyone in our audience has any questions for our panelists, I'd love to just open up the floor. Feel free to turn your camera on and ask the question, or you can put it in the chat box if you're more comfortable staying off camera. But I'd love to just kind of open this up for a dialogue with our panelists, any questions that you might have directly. You're gonna make me call on people?
I had a question that
Sure.
isn't so much with the with the starting out point, because you helped me manage my expectations about being realistic with entry level jobs, but I'm thinking beyond that and wondering what sort of language to employ at maybe the next job, because I'm very aware of unequal pay in women. And are there any tips you might have on phrasing things in negotiations at subsequent jobs that might be useful?
Can you give us an example so we can do a scenario, because it's easy to do it that way. There's so many different nuances that happen with negotiation.
Yeah, just making sure I'm making what a man in my position would be offered. I am sorry, it's my cat in the background.
Oh, my cat cries too. On my end, I think that entry level can't really negotiate, but say kind of go up a level, or get into that point, like really be able to talk about what you've done in that role that can make you that money. So if you're doing a level up, entry level job, have that job description in your hand, seeing what skills you actually did do in that job, and be able to say that to your hiring manager and via email. But always say ask. Like women don't ask enough about salaries, even if it's like $1 or $2. Like you ask until that's all you can do is you tell it, hey, I ask. But if you don't ask, it's kind of this like you could have asked, maybe gotten the money, but if you don't ask, you don't get anything. So just always ask and just put something out there. If tell all they can do is tell you no. So why not just try to ask?
Yeah, as I think that's a great point. There's a book, and I'll have to find it and I'll send it to you, Abby, about women asking for more money, because there's a whole psychology on it about women's downfalls and asking for money, because that's just what we do. I think that's the way that the nature that we are. I think the biggest thing, do your market research, look at specifics about locations. So there will be certain, women, thank you, Martha, for putting that in there. Women don't ask. Look at certain cities, cost of living. What does that mean? Like Annalie said, ask. The worst they can do is say no. I promise this. when you try to negotiate a salary, it's not the first time that they've been asked. So you're not going to be the first person that they're all of a sudden like, oh my God, I'm so offended that they did this. If anything, go high, they'll come down. I always ask for a lot more than probably what's even market, but then we sometimes meet in the middle, right? It's like going to buy a car. You go in really low, they go in really high, and you kind of find yourself in the middle as time goes on. But absolutely, especially entry levels, I feel like there's such a range. You can find some jobs that, it just depends on what the organization is. Are they a smaller firm? Are they larger? What's their promotion? I would ask about, especially as you go in, how frequent do you look at promotions? Because some companies are like, oh, it's just merit based, but a lot of companies, especially mine, it's like every year we look at our associate levels and figure out how quick we can get them up to speed and give them those experiences. So it depends on what the company kind of culture and policy and, mantra is around promotions.
Yep.
Okay.
And I would
And
say
also-
absolutely prepared with two things. First is, what are you bringing to the table? I've known some folks who have, just by speaking out in a meeting, garnered more business. It was a lead that someone else took off with, but it resulted in, actually that had happened to me early in my career, it resulted in $1.5 million contract because I spoke up during a client meeting and they're like, oh, we didn't know that your company did that. And I said, absolutely, let me. And so the next time in that same company, I was able to say, well, because of this initiative, we've now gotten $1.5 million contract. So knowing, like, articulating your value and being prepared for that, and what you've brought to the table. The flip side, sometimes they don't have the salary, as we've heard, but there are other compensatory things, like, can you negotiate for, they'll pay for professional development for a month for you to get a certificate in digital analytics, something like that. You're saying two things there. You want to learn this, and it's a valuable skill set. Perhaps they provide profit sharing. So when they've done a certain amount of advanced business, what cut of that could potentially be yours? And just other kinds of compensation. Do your homework. Glassdoor has a lot of reviews on that stuff, and just setting expectations. If you're going to work in an agency, you're going to start lower, but your trajectory is going to be much higher because their advancement is usually every 15 months to the next position. If you're going in a corporation, you'll probably start a little bit higher, but it's going to take you longer to make more money. And it's more incremental. Instead of a $10,000 raise, you're going to get a $1,500 raise, and so on. And then in a nonprofit, just anticipate it's going to be 10% lower than even the lowest scale.
Yep.
I'm public health, so there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Any other questions from our participants?
I saw the one in the chat.
Oh, I missed that. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So the
go
question
ahead.
is, for those that didn't see it, what are some of the best questions to ask during the interview process? And do you have any other interview specific tips for increasing your chances of landing a position? I think that we have talked about it a couple of times, but I think the takeaways are research, ask company specific questions. Don't come like very broad, the ones that you like first come up in Google. We know that. We know that trick. So ask very pointed, specific questions. It could be, for example, I saw on your website that you published an article on this. Can you tell me, what went into publishing that article? Something like, even if it's not job related, but that shows, holy crap, they not only went to the website and like just didn't, find out we have 17 locations. They actually read about some of the things that we have published. It could be very specific about the person itself. I think I always like to ask, like, the person in this role before me, what were some of the roadblocks that they had? because to me that, you're asking about what are the things that I'm going to be facing, what are the challenges I'm already coming into. That way, if you get it to the next round, you can say, this was brought up, about a challenge that this person in the role before me had. Here's how I would plan on, attacking that given the information that I have, right? It's very, very specific questions. Don't be scared to ask for more information on the job itself, because to me, I think that's one of the overlooked things in it, because you get the job description, you're like, okay, that's great. Job description isn't going to cover a lot or everything. So it's like, in addition to whatever's on paper, what are some additional things that you'd want to know? What does the reporting look like? What are some of the, administrative tasks that go along with this? Like, very specific. To me, it just gives you a better picture, because as much of a match as it is for the company, it needs to be a match for you. And I think that gets even more critical as your career goes on. Obviously, landing your first job is amazing. I don't know what the current, percentages of people that stay at their first job out of college are, but I know I've had, since I graduated 10 years ago, this is my third job. So you have to kind of try.
It's been 10 years.
I know, is that crazy?
Oh my goodness.
College. Not even, yeah. So it's, it's as much of a fit for you as it is for the company. So just ask questions that may not seem remotely job related, but are more about culture fit. Who's your boss? Who's your boss's boss? What are they like? Just so you get a better understanding of where you kind of fit. To me, that just makes you seem super interested in the role, in the company, in the culture itself, and really just shows that you are more passionate than, so can you tell me what a day in the life would look like? Like, that's great, but 95, I would say even more % of the time, the response will be, it's going to change every day. Like that, it's, think a little bit more. You have to be more thoughtful in what type of questions you ask. But I think asking about those major buckets will help.
Mm-hmm. And I would say also like tenacity. I know that for my roles, I go through so many candidates because it's like, associates move very, very quickly. Probably Morgan does know they move so fast. And sometimes you don't get the job. Sometimes you can be the perfect interview, do the best job you can, but you don't get the job. So how do you take that feedback from your recruiter? I always call them and be like, hey, how's it going for you? Or your thoughts on the interview? And ask them like, hey, so the team told me about you in more detail. And kind of go through them, like, and everything, and say, you have any questions? So I want to make sure they can like understand that, because I feel like that's the next step too. If you don't get feedback, well, you can't learn and kind of grow. So like, Ample had somebody who interviewed for a role like last month, and she had really bad feedback. Kind of just was like really nervous, didn't really do the job she could do. But I knew she was really good. So I'm like, hey girl, so what you have to do next time, I'm sending you for another job and see if you can do this one well. And she did amazing in the interview and got the job. So it's kind of just like, if you have the want to get these jobs in these places, have the need to receive feedback, take it into consideration with yourself and be able to grow upon that, because that's how you are in like the world too as well. You're always gonna get feedback from teams, from everybody. So maybe to take that, consideration and be able to kind of grow from that within interviews or any of your jobs that you do take.
Yeah, I just want to double click on what Martha said about preparing questions ahead of time and write them down. Write everything down.
Yeah.
Write down points you want to make. Write down, scenarios that could be brought up that you have a hard time remembering, whether it's like numbers or depending on what kind of interview it is. Write everything down, because the moment you sit down, it will all go away. No matter if you are a great interviewer or someone who gets really nervous. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but because I'm in HR, I've interviewed so many people. I'm very comfortable, being in an interview, but I still get nervous. And so I want to make sure that all of the things, especially as you become more experienced interviewing, you can anticipate some of the questions you're going to be asked, and the difficulty rises the further you get in the process. So making sure you are really comfortable and confident in stories that you need to tell, in the way that you present yourself, things like that. Putting it down on paper just makes you all that more comfortable. I think that's a great point, and I don't want to overlook it. So.
And rehearse. I mean, I just remember in the last couple of years, I made a big move and I interviewed a lot. And and I rehearse and rehearse and rehearse for my job interviews. And I got to the point where I was like essentially leading the interview because I knew what I wanted to say, and I knew I was not going to walk out of that room without saying everything that I wanted to say. And, you know, so I would definitely recommend, like, in addition to writing down, just really sit like with your experience and with your history and rehearse it, and really be ready to make sure that you don't leave anything on the table when you leave that interview.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. So it's not looked down upon if you are looking down at your notes in the middle of an interview? I've had
Put them like on your screen. Like if you have note pages, put them on your computer screen so you can look at them, but not like look down, because that's like they don't like that. Just have
Another
like,
plus of the
in front of you.
virtual world is you
Yeah.
can kind of
Yeah.
secretly have notes without actually having a notebook in front of you.
Yeah. And I think
But
it's
if it's-
okay to say like, oh, I'm just going to refer to something. I just want to make sure that I'm, ask this the way that I had intended or something, because people know that you're nervous. And I think especially as women, it's okay to qualify things that you're doing where we tend to be like, oh, sorry, hold on, and then you just get like, you kind of get flustered, but just say like, okay, this isn't fully baked, or this might not come out the right way, but let me, refer to this thing. I think I tend to be like, then you just go and go and go and you're talking, you're like, I don't even know what I just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay to pause, be okay with silence.
Yeah.
Or, that, especially just say like, okay, hold on, do you mind just giving me a second to think about this? 100% okay to say in an interview.
Okay.
I don't think the assumption is that you're lying or that you're making something up. It's especially if this is a slightly higher job where you have background that you want to reference. I produced X number of millions of dollars in event sales or something like that. Like, I want to make sure I get that number right, and it might not be right on the top of my head. And the assumption is not that I'm making that up. I just want to make sure that I get those points about myself and my experience perfectly accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no higher praise than when someone's taking notes of what I say. So if the interview asks a question or answers one of your questions and you start writing and they stop talking, you can just look up and say, I just want to write down some of the things that you said so that I'm remembering, for the next time or something. Just when interviews used to be in person, I always advise folks to bring a notebook or something to write on and a pen, because it's easier to take notes and look someone in the eye than it is to use your phone. That digital device can sometimes get in the way. Absolutely have your phone with you. Don't have it ringing and stuff like that, but interrupting you. But I just think there's no higher praise than someone taking notes. Now you don't want to stop for 30 minutes and write down. I'm like, I'm going to use that against you. You don't want that, but definitely take notes.
But I think it's a great call out, Christina, because you can't see what people are doing. So if you say to them, oh, I'm just taking notes real quick, as you're not making eye contact, that's fine. I would be totally fine with that. But if you're looking down and they make an assumption you're on your phone or doing something else, just let them know, oh, I'm doing this right now.
Okay.
I'm looking at my notes. I'm doing this so they don't assume something different.
And same thing's true for phone interviews. So you might have a pause of silence while you're taking notes. Just let the person know. That tells me you're a good communicator on top of everything.
Agreed.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
And also too, as a recruiter, like I try my best to make all my candidates feel like, good and they can talk to me and make it more natural. So if your recruiter doesn't do that for you, that's on them. But like usually recruiters are really open and very like conversational. They can make you feel more comfortable before you go into like depths of the conversation. So have someone who can, have like combo with you and just like talk about your day, and they can go into the more of the detail of the interview moving forward.
Be interesting to see what the backgrounds of all of our participants are, just because you being in public health is going to be a very different experience than the interviews that I have done myself, but also been in because I'm in advertising, where it's a lot more about culture fit than it is about, volunteer hours or something like that. So just, be mindful, research very specifically about whatever industry you're going into, because it is very different. And, I think about the engineers that I used to hire and how different that was. And it was so much more about your technical capability than it ever was about a culture fit. And so it's just very different. So just when you're going through, depending on what industry you're really going into, research what some of the industry trends are, whether it's interviewing or just where the industry is going itself, I think is a good rule of thumb as well, broader than just the company, because that'll help, show you what are some of the challenges that industry could be facing, in addition to what are the ways that that industry interviews, because I think it's very different where you're going.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies.
Of course.
Anyone else on the call want to share what they're studying or ask any other questions about about this conversation? Or
The fact that you all are here says a lot about you. So we appreciate you guys showing up.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Christostee Turner, and I just graduated with my doctorate in urban education. So I'm looking for probably a professorial job, or I've also been interested in diversity and inclusion positions, because that's, even though my degree is in education, it was in cultural foundations of education. So I guess if I had a question, I'm trying to think of different ways, because all my background is in early childhood and teaching, and I've done a lot of work in diversity and inclusion. However, it's been in the education setting. However, there's a number of positions out there for like executive of diversity and inclusion or director of this. And so what is a good way, or where can I start kind of melding my experience with what they're looking for that position?
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm like, ooh, smart girl, smart lady.
I'm going to jump in really quick before we get some responses. I have a couple of alumni I'd like to connect you with who have similar backgrounds. So I will follow up with you after this call. So there's a couple of folks who have similar backgrounds and might be able to give you some insight as well.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, my end. I worked in DE&I on the TA, like recruiting standpoint, not really in the business, but I think that kids are human beings too. So like you're working with humans either way. So I think that you can talk about like how you dealt with kids, or with like the parents, or with the teachers, or whoever you worked with, and how you're able to kind of like keep them together. Also with diversity and inclusion, it's very booming right now. It's popping, like so many open roles. So do like information with people, like find people on LinkedIn you can talk to about this in more detail. See like what part of the industry you want to be in. If you want to be like entertainment, do you want to keep doing nonprofit? Do you want to do education? Kind of see where you're best fit, because I feel like coming into the job, it's going to be like, you're there for a long time usually, to be able to have like a really good overview of the company, the job, the team, and have a really good mentor in the company too as well. In my first role in diversity and inclusion, I had a really good mentor, boss. He told me like it was all the time, let me know about like how I could grow in the industry, because he was similar to me, from the Midwest, also African American. So we had a kind of like candor together. So it was really important to have that, to have somebody who's above you can kind of grow with. But do your research on the companies, as well as like meet people from like Abby's standpoint, network too as well.
Yeah, I think we have, we've gone through so many folks who have been DE&I who have gotten bigger roles at bigger companies, because right now it is such a growing capability requirement, right? We have people, every contract that we sign has some type of, what are you doing for, equitable practices within your organization, which is amazing and long overdue, but here we are. And so I think, me being in learning and development, we are lockstep with our DE&I counterparts. And so I think if they're not posing it as learning and teaching, I think you're a perfect candidate for a lot of these roles. And so just showing your worth of, I can teach people, because of what I'm trying to say this in the appropriate way. So just bear with me as I think about it. You can't mandate these types of things, right? You can't mandate diversity and inclusion training. People have to be wanting to learn to change behaviors. And for you, having that knowledge about education and teaching practices and things like that puts you, to, in my opinion, above a lot of other folks. So tying those two things together and showing your experience in that is, to me, going to show any job that would, be looking to hire someone in a DE&I role would be a very easy, you would be an easy, very sell as a candidate, because you have that education background and the ability to teach a very challenging topic for a lot of people. So I'm trying to make sure I answer your question, but I think that you have the ability to tell your story, combining those two things that you're passionate about and have experience in, because in my opinion, DE&I doesn't go without education and teaching. It has to be tied together.
I would hop on that too and say, sometimes new college grads have a tendency to want to work in a company in a specific DE&I position that is either newly created or has been there. Consider consultancies, because there are a lot of consultancies out there that are opening up a DE&I division. And the companies are looking for advisors on DE&I, and that's an awesome stepping stone to then getting hired by that same company who you've been consulting with for the last year, and now they're like, oh, I really want to have this person work here. And so that is certainly one avenue. Another avenue is there are a lot of professional associations out there. So if you don't get hired right away, or even if you do, consider working with a professional association like an education association, or we have lots of agency kind of associations that are looking for a DE&I officer. So that shows, you mentioned wanting to get into an executive position and seeing opportunities out there. That may not be an option for you right out of school, but it is an option if you work with a professional association in their DE&I newly created officer position. Like I work with the Public Relations Society of America, or Greater Together in Milwaukee is all about that, or Milwaukee, or AIGA Wisconsin, or AMA Wisconsin. All of those organizations are looking for a DE&I officer. So that'll give you that leadership component along with those consultancies that I mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
And also too, you have a different background than people do have in this industry. So like celebrate that difference too as well. You can bring a lot to a team with your different education backgrounds, different experiences. And that's what kind of we want to have. We want to have someone who's different than us. We can bring that, not have groupthink, but people who are different. So we can have different aspects of thinking in our company. So be confident in what you're doing, about what you got your degree in, and it's like show them who you are when you interview.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Anyone else like to share or ask any questions? I'm sure there aren't any more in the chat box. I don't think there are.
I don't see anything.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm going to wrap it up a little bit early this evening, give you a couple 15 minutes back of your snowy Tuesday night. But our panelists have been kind enough to share their contact information. So tomorrow, look for the follow-up email that I'm going to send out. It's going to include the recording of this conversation, as well as a very, very brief survey. Please take that survey. It helps me create more student programming that is engaging and helpful and focus on topics that you actually want to hear about. So please take time to fill out that survey. And it will also include contact information for our three panelists who all expressed that they are open and willing to connect and answer more questions if you have any other questions. I'm also available at any time, and my contact information will be on the email as well. to introduce you to other alumni or connect you with folks in our almost 200,000 plus Panther family who are also willing to share their expertise and their experience. So thank you so much to our panelists, Martha, Annalie, and Morgan. Thank you for bringing your expertise and your insight and your passion for the work that you do to this conversation. Also, I forgot to mention that there will be a job seekers toolbox in that email. So click on that. It was put together by Martha and the Big Shoes Network, and it's really helpful information, kind of just walks you through sort of how to really put yourself out there, especially in this unique environment. So keep an eye out for that email tomorrow. Reach out to us. We're here to support you as you finish up your schooling and then head out into that the job market. So any final thoughts, ladies, as we wrap this up?
You can do it.
Go for it.
Yeah, network, guys. Like, it's a lot to do with getting a job. Like, my first year of college, I networked at like a career fair at UWM, my first job. So like, put yourself out there, and it's like all you can do is do that and make sure you can like be yourself and like follow your passions too. I think that's a big thing as well. I don't go to like any job. Be able to have a job where you want to like see yourself grow into, so you don't waste your time and the company's time as well.
Yep. And there are virtual job fairs happening in our career and resource center on campus. So keep an eye out for those. Get involved and network virtually. It is happening. It's a little different, but it's definitely still happening. It's very important. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Again, look for that email tomorrow and have an amazing rest of your spring semester, and keep an eye out for future Alumni Network events. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay warm.
Mhm.